Ever wonder how your opponents are always 2 or 3 levels higher than you when you run into them at Wick? That's because they know how to get ahead during the mid game. Don't worry, I'll show you how you can too. Let me start off with saying that the mid game is probably the most difficult part of Eternal Return to play. You have to manage your mastery, making transitions, and contesting objectives. So here's some ways you can ensure that you'll make it to the late game. I'm also going to show you a secret tech on how you can snowball objectives together during the mid game. Let's start off with your mid game goals. The goal of the mid game is to push any advantage that you might have gotten in the early game and set yourself up to be one of the stronger players for the late game. If you're behind from the early game, you'll want to use the mid game to catch back up. If you watch my early game guide, you'll know that you have to finish your build at the start of night 1 so that you aren't behind. But that doesn't mean you could just take your foot off the gas now that you have your build. For those competing at Alpha, you'll need to get comfortable with the speed at which your character can take an objective. If you're alone, can you burn it down before someone comes to contest you? If you take it slow, are you better coming in late and poking someone else while they're on it and trying to snag it away from them? The easiest way to find out is by going into a practice tool or an AI game and just see how quickly you can do it, and learn what's the optimal spell rotation for taking it down. You should also have a plan for what you're going to build the mithril into. It's likely you could have started prepping the components during your routing. If you made your way into the Battlezone, be ready for a fight. In a lot of zones, each remote drone isn't weighted equally for each character. Some drones are in narrow corridors, while others are in open spaces. A good example of this is Alley. If you're a character with a wall stun or a slow dodgeable spell, you'll probably want to be in the narrow corridor. I'm not experienced with each individual character to let y'all know which Battlezone you should be going to, but think about what your strengths and weaknesses are as a character and pick accordingly. Does a specific Battlezone enable one of your strengths, or does it cover one of your weaknesses? That's probably a good one to go to. For more on the differences between Battlezones and objectives, be sure to check out my Battlezone versus Objective video, card above. I mentioned a secret tip about snowballing transitions, and this comes if you won your respective Battlezone. Pay attention to what zone your Battlezone was in. Because Battlezones occur on day 2, Tree of Life and Meteorite will be spawning at the start of night 2, or roughly when your Battlezone will finish. If your Battlezone is Forest, you can stick around to grab that tree. This is the easiest zone to do it in because of where the Tree of Life is located, but you can do it in Hospital with the other Tree of Life, or if a Meteorite is falling into your zone. Since it was a Battlezone, you'll have the vision advantage to see if anyone will contest you. So that's one rare resource for winning the Battlezone, another one if another rare resource is spawning in your Battlezone, and if you've been hunting and keeping up your mastery, you probably have enough credits to call in another one. Call one in, and that's 3 potential transitions right there on night 2. And let's say you got a night 1 rare resource as well, you're looking at 4 transitions, which would easily make you one of the strongest players in the lobby. Way back on the channel, I talked about one of the biggest reasons I climbed from gold to diamond was getting obsessed with hunt timers. With all the new additions to Eternal Return, hunts don't make or break a game anymore, but there are some guidelines you'll still want to know, and that's the difference between daytime hunts and nighttime hunts. If you think about how the early game goes, you'll get a good understanding of when hunts will respawn. Chickens will obviously respawn first. They're the first hunts that spawn in the start of the game, and the first hunts players take when they need leather, and have the shortest respawn time. Optimizing for chickens isn't really a thing though. They don't give enough XP, and just know if these hunts are taken on day 1, they're going to typically respawning right after you finish your build on night 1. Dogs and wolves are typically be taken later into day 1 on first rotation. This is where the bulk of your hunt experience will come in. These hunts are your day hunts and will typically be respawning at various times of day 2. Around the time you complete your Battlezone or Alpha, you're likely to see all these hunts respawning. If you win a Battlezone, this is safe free XP in the zone. If you lose the Battlezone, try to respawn in an empty wolf zone. Bears are night hunts. Bears spawn at night 1, and because players are taking them as they complete their build, the earliest they'll respawn is just before night 2. A good strategy is if you're able to take bears in a zone on night 1, return to that zone on night 2. This is because you'll have the timer for when the exact moment those bears will appear. As you get into higher elo, players will be able to pick up on these timers regardless if they were the ones to take the bears or not, so make sure you're on time. Boars and bats are the exception to the day-night hunt cycle. Despite boars spawning during the day, they get ignored in the early game for how long they take to kill. If they are taken on day 1, they'll respawn near the end of night 1. If they are taken at night 1, they'll respawn near the end of day 2. I've found you're most likely to see them respawn at night. Because bats always drop a camera, a lot of players avoid taking bats before completing most of their builds so that they have the inventory space. But because they're on a shorter timer than bears, they respawn before the next night. In my experience, there's no real patterns on when players take bats. This is just something I've noticed. If you found that information on hunts helpful, consider leaving a like. Helps me out a lot. From night 2 on, you basically have 2 paths on what you can be doing. Some of these paths again are character specific, so find out what your character does best. The first thing you can do is contest an objective. The second Tree of Life and Meteorite will be spawning on night 2. The second option is to continue hunting. As stated, bears have now respawned, so take a bear zone, and take whatever hunts you have in the zone. If you farm enough credits, you can call in a rare resource. You'll also have the chance to get one off the bears. Remember, you can start getting rare resources off second bears and on. Regardless of what path you take, you should be coming out of Night 2 with at least 1 or 2 transitions. Most players will have 2 or 3 by now, so make sure you're keeping up. Lastly, you'll want to prepare for Day 3 objectives. This is the same checklist as Night 1. Look for players with build discrepancies. If you're 2 or 3 in mastery up, or have 2 or 3 transition lead, you're likely to win those fights. And again, know what you're going to do next. Are you going to the second battle zone? Are you going to a mega? Are you going to farm for credits? All of these are valid options. Do you have food? A lot of mid and late game food is going to come from looting bodies rather than crafting food. If you lost the first battle zone, or didn't go to the first one, and you're a battle zone character, you should go to the second battle zone. There's a larger incentive on the second battle zone, with a force core being one of the rewards. With less players in the game, and the previous winners being disincentivized to show up, I've seen this be a free rare resource lots of the time. If you won the first battle zone, but don't think you're strong enough to contest Omega, your middle ground is to farm for credits. Find the zone based on the hunt patterns mentioned earlier in the video, and try to farm enough credits to where you can call in a force core. Even better if you can call in a blood sample. It's likely that if you didn't spend any credits after the first battle zone, you'll likely have enough from saving up. Try to get something here because when Night 3 begins, we're going to be starting the late game. If you're one of the stronger players in the lobby, you'll probably want to go to Omega. Omega also results in a force core. Same as Alpha, you need to know how fast or how slow your character takes this objective, and run some different tests. With Alpha, you're more or less likely to be around the same strength each game when it spawns, but Omega is a different story. Do some tests with no transitions, a few transitions, and all transitions. Test at different mastery levels too. Once again, all this can be done in the practice tool. Incorporate these strategies into every game and you'll see a difference in your play almost immediately. Of course, you'll have to make it to the mid game to do so, and you're going to have to know how to get through the early game. Click or tap the screen now to watch my early game guide and learn some tips and tricks on mastering the early game.